thank you very much for taking time to have the interview.
Of course.
Can you just briefly present yourself? Who are you? What do you do?
Sure. So my name is Chloé Galibert-Laîné. I'm a French filmmaker and a researcher, and I've been producing desktop films for the last few years. And thank you very much for having me for this interview.
So you have a master in film studies and in sociology, but how did you learn to make films?
Well, I would say I wanted to be a filmmaker for as long as I can remember. And I started studying film studies as a way to get closer to that goal, even if my studies were mostly theoretical. And so the thing is that the more I advanced in my studies, the more I actually got really interested in research. So that thing that we do in academia. But at the same time, I was also pursuing this idea or this dream to become a filmmaker. So I would basically make films as a side. And so that was the case for my bachelor and my master's as well, that I was writing, very classical theses for my studies, and I would be doing the films basically on the weekends and on evenings. And it wasn't until I discovered, the form of the video essay, which might be something that we talk about during the conversation or not, but it's basically a form of video that is sort of between filmmaking and research. I discovered that form when I was doing my master's. And that sort of appeared to me as this way of merging my two main interests, that was research on the one hand and filmmaking on the other. And so that sort of became the form in which I started working, in the form of the desktop documentary or desktop film that we're going to talk about now, is often considered as a subgenre of the video essay. So to answer your question, I'm basically self-taught in filmmaking, and I was mostly, and still am mostly interested in editing, which is something that I've just learned with tutorials. But it's getting so easier as there are many more resources available online for teaching yourself technical tools, and also the technical tools are evolving in such a way that they are easier and easier to use. So yeah, I didn't really receive, outside for a few workshops, I didn't really receive a proper training in practical filmmaking. Most of it was YouTube tutorials.
I guess it also was a lot of trial and error then. So
yeah, for sure.
So is there what's a mistake you would other filmmaker starters want to spare from, that you say, oh, I would not want them to make it, I made it?
Interesting question. Well, I do think that it's important to make your own mistakes. So you will have to do some. And sort of learn from them. What would be one mistake that I think is not worth making? Maybe being paralyzed by the people that you admire, and you think, I will not be a filmmaker unless I'm as good as those people, whoever you identify as your masters. And I remember that a lot, having a lot of almost being paralyzed by, the admiration and the fear that whatever I do is never going to be as good as the people, the filmmakers whose work I admire. And I was right, of course, none of what I'm making is as good as the work of the actual masters, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because if you start with this fear, you will just never do anything. And that way you will never reach the point 20 or 30 or 50 years from now where you could actually be making something that's really as good as the works that you were admiring back then. So you really need to start. It's not about not being ambitious, but it's about just allowing yourself to do your small little things and don't feel like it has to be so great the first time. You can start small, I guess, would be the way to summarize what I just said.
And I think you did a quite good job of finding your style, finding your own way. Was this, how did you manage to do that? I'm referring to that, for example, me personally, I've seldom observed people you write a lot with text, for example, in your film, that in one part of the screen you're starting to write a text, and at the same time another film is showing. You even open Adobe Premiere and then you kind of dissect the film. And So how did you find your style?
Well, it's interesting because actually, if you think about it, basically every film I've made, with very few exceptions, actually started from commenting on another film. So it could seem like I actually don't really, have a style as much as I answer or I respond and I get inspired by others people's styles. And but then of course by doing so repeatedly, it's like, it was sort of a work, and that's what I like about the video essay, is that it's always responding to something that already exists. So you don't have the anxiety of starting with the blank page and you're like, I have to write something that's completely new and no one has ever thought of before, which, some people can do, but I find really, it just creates a lot of anxiety. And I find it much easier and actually more stimulating to start from answering to something that's already there and start from the thoughts and the emotions that this work that already exists, triggers in me. But the thing is, and I think it's the same for a lot of video essays or filmmakers that work with found footage, so that, respond to pre-existing images and sounds, that, the first time you'll do it, you will just answer the one film that you've chosen to respond to. And then you'll do it again with another film, and then with another film, and then with another film. And then you sort of start to see that, there's a reason why you chose all of the films that you chose to comment upon, because they have a common denominator, which is your taste and, your questions and your interests. And then in the way that you respond to those films, you also start to feel, that you have your own way of responding to those films, which I think is where your style is going to emerge. So for me, it wasn't really so much about, sitting at the table before I did anything and then be like, okay, what could be my style? Oh, desktop filmmaking, that's cool. Oh, writing, because I like writing a lot. And then I sort of composed the ideas of my style beforehand. It was more about just producing whatever felt right and what I felt excited to do and what made me happy and joyful. And then when I look back at a number of films and I look at them together and I'm like, okay, there is a style, or there are common denominators between those films. And I guess that's what you're referring to as my style. But it's more as something that I, discover retrospectively than something that I had really planned and anticipated beforehand.
Watching the Pain of Others was one of your most recent works, which was very successful. How long did you work on it, and what were big obstacles for you while making the film?
I worked on it for, I want to say 8 or 9 months, sort of. I mean, it wasn't full time, so there would be times when I was intensely, immersed in the material, and then other time where I would be doing something else and then getting back to it. But in total, yeah, I would say a bit shorter than a year. And what was one of the big obstacles for making it? There were several. There was the film, probably a lot of people listening to us haven't seen it. So it's a film that responds to another film called The Pain of Others that was made out of YouTube videos that the filmmaker called Penny Lane found on YouTube. And the videos are made by women who think that they have a disease called Morgellons disease that they think is real, but the doctor says it's not real. It's not a real condition. And the film sort of explores this tension between what is real and what is not real. And I think one question was about the ethics of making this film, because you work with appropriated material, and especially when you work on material that was found online, which is the case for anyone doing desktop films and desktop documentaries. The question of, do I have the right to appropriate those images and whom am I stealing them from, is very important. And especially because in these videos, these women are showing themselves being quite vulnerable, showing their bodies, talking about their conditions. There were, not only legal, but also, and I would say even most importantly, ethical questions that I had to answer in terms of how do I represent them without exploiting their images and without doing something with their images that they wouldn't want me to do. So that was a big question, and it took me quite a long time to sort of arrive to the form of the film that you've seen, which is my answer to those questions, the best answers I could find. And another challenge, which is actually related, because solving the second one was sort of my way to solve the first one, was the question of how much do I, or a version of me, need to be a character in the film. Because if you've seen the film, you know, it has my voice, quite a lot of it, and I'm speaking in the first person about my own experience watching the film. And it was quite a challenge for me to decide how much I needed to be in the film, how much I needed to be in the center or at the margins of the film, or whether my personal experience was actually not interesting at all and I should just remove it from the story. So that's something that I struggled with until the end of the process of making the film. Actually, that was the last thing that I changed at the end, was the amount of me, or, you know, the character that I embody, that would be in the film.
How did you come to the decision to be part of the film? Even you start the film with your experience of watching the film.
Yeah, actually for me, I think it was actually a way to sort of answer the ethical question that I mentioned just before. I was thinking, okay, if I want to use the image of these women without it being exploitative, without it being problematic, the way that I'm appropriating their image, I sort of need to do the same thing with my own image so that we're sort of equal. You know, it's always an illusion of the relationship being horizontal between the filmmaker and the subjects, quote unquote. But I felt it was less problematic if we were all appearing in the same way as women on screen talking about our bodies, because at some point in the film I talk about, you know, my own body and I sort of filming and stuff, vlogging. So I was really trying to respond to them in the same medium that they're using, which is the YouTube vlog. I felt that was less problematic in terms of the ethics than me as the filmmaker just being a silent gaze, you know, observing other bodies and judging them without ever offering myself as also an object of the gaze. So it was sort of a way for me to negotiate with these questions of who's looking at whom and why and how, to introduce myself as another image in the film. And also Penny Lane, the filmmaker, because she was not visible in her own film, but I sort of bring her in my film as yet another woman who is, you know, yet another female image, I guess is what I'm saying.
And so now we've been nerding a bit about the film, like a fan and filmmaker. But I think that leads to a question which I ask myself sometimes as a filmmaker. How did you manage to differentiate between what's interesting for you also as a researcher and what might be interesting for an audience?
Well, one easy way to answer the question is that I showed work in progress of the film to other people so that they could tell me whether or not it was interesting. That's one way. But then more deeply, I do believe that whatever interests you, if it really interests you, like if there's something at your core that is passionate about that thing, it will be interesting to other people. Like no matter what it is. Like as a spectator, I get that. Like, you know, I'm almost never going to watch a film or especially documentary because I'm interested in the subject and want to learn about it. It's rarely the case. It can happen, but it's rarely the case. If I want to learn about a topic, I will not look at a documentary. I will look at, you know, Wikipedia, or I will go to scientific resources. But most of the time when I'm looking for a documentary, what I want is someone's passion for their topic. It's the relationship between the filmmaker and the topic that is really fascinating for me as a viewer. So, you know, if you're making a film about a subject that I don't care at all, you know, like, I don't know, cars, like I really don't care about cars. If you're making a film about cars, you know, I will not be watching it because I want to learn about cars, because I really don't. But if I understand that you have this very intimate, super serious, you know, link, connection, or passion for that specific, not cars in general, that specific car, or that specific question about how cars are made or whatever, or this industry of cars, or whatever aspect of cars you're really interested in, you will sort of, you will drag me into it through your conviction that this is something that is worth paying attention to. And that's sort of the reason why, to get back to your question before, like, why do I, present myself in the way I do in the film? It's because I do believe that it's really, then maybe people will see my film and they'll be like, no, this is actually not interesting at all. But at least that's what I want to believe. That if you have someone, a researcher, who's actually really trying to figure something out that's super important for them, then the process of them trying to find that thing is always going to be really interesting. Even if what they're looking for is not something that you need for yourself, but there's something about the process of researching, finding information and trying to make sense of something that has a thrill. Like, if it's well told, it's like a really good story. It's like you have a character who's on a quest to achieve something. It's not, saving a princess or a child or whatever. It's like achieving this goal. But still, it has the structure of a traditional story. The character, the quest, and the obstacles, and the people who are going to help the person achieve the goal. And I do believe that this story can basically be told about any subject at all that you think that will drive you to research it in such an extended way.
And I also think this is the reason why it's such a delight to watch you in the beginning of the film, kind of dissect the film, you analyze it, probably because you yourself have a passion for dissecting films and analyzing them. I have one last question. What do you think is the most important skill or thing if you want to make desktop documentaries?
I'm going to say you have to be patient, which is not a way to make it very attractive, I know, but it's something that you sort of need to be mindful of, that making a desktop film takes a long time. And I don't just mean the researching, but I mean the actual making of the film. And it's something that I realized because I've been teaching desktop documentary in a number of schools and workshops, and it's come to my attention that the form is really easy to grasp and it seems like it's really easy to make. And in a way it is, because the techniques are not that complicated to appropriate, but they're very time consuming. So because nothing works as it should on the first try. So you were mentioning tries and errors earlier. Definitely with the desktop documentary form, because you will be recording something and the windows on the desktop will not be where they should be, and a link is dead, and you have to search for another way to access the same media, and the comment under the video that you wanted to film is now covered by 10 new comments, so you have to scroll, and that was not something you had anticipated. Always things happen that make the shooting of the recording of the desktop a lot more complicated than you think it would be. And then you enter the editing process, which is another kind of nightmare. If you want the film to feel like it has some form of continuity, which seems to be something that desktop filmmakers tend to pursue, that's also quite hard to create because there's always glitches and things that change on the desktop that you actually hadn't anticipated. So which is actually really, like, that makes desktop filmmaking a really good way to learn about the desktop environment as it is, because you realize it's not static, like it changes all the time without you realizing it. So yeah, I would say if you want to make a desktop film, please do. Seriously, do appropriate the techniques, like the tool for recording your screens. There are many of them. They're very easy to find. There's a lot of them are free. And then even for editing the films, you also have free softwares that work just fine. So you can just get started today and do it. But do not expect to be done tomorrow, because it will take a lot more time than you think. Like filmmaking, like making any movie, it does take time. So that would be perhaps one advice, is to make sure you're patient enough and you don't expect results immediately, because it will probably be disappointing if you don't take enough time to bring the film to the next level.